Okay, straight into it today with a continuation of the office do-over. In the last video I installed the desk, specifically the top of the desk, and I'm really happy with how it's all coming together so far. One small update that has occurred between then and now is I designed this 3D printed filament rack that floats between the two small cabinets. I think it looks pretty neat and certainly is a convenient way when it comes to being able to visually see what filament I have. But today's project is to work on some shelves, or specifically a couple of floating shelves that will live above the desk. I'm going to repurpose the old desk, which was originally going to be used for the new desktop, but doing so would mean that I'd be without a desk for a few weeks, and that wasn't really something that I wanted to do. So the easy solution is what I ended up doing in the previous video, which was to simply buy some new timber for that, and instead I've earmarked the old tabletop for these new shelves. Now the old desktop is actually made up of two separate panels. They were actually never joined together like the new one that I made. And since I want these shelves to span the full length of the office, I will need to join the two panels together, and eventually I'll cut them into two shelves, and I think it'll be easier and cleaner to join them first before cutting them down. To get a clean seam between these two pieces, I'm going to try a trick I've seen on a lot of other YouTube channels. I'm going to line up both sides as close as possible and then use the track saw to cut into both edges at the same time. Hopefully this should give me a perfect match for a seamless fit. This worked really well, and the net result is that we have this really nice, clean, seamless fit. This is going to be important because, as we know, end grain to end grain gluing isn't generally the strongest connection. And to give it a bit more strength, I'm going to add a few dominoes, which will also help with the alignment. Now these shelves are nearly 3.2 meters long, so I don't have any type of clamp that will get anywhere close to that. So just like for the desktop panel, I'm going to use pocket screws as a way of clamping the edges together. This won't be for any tangible strength, but this worked really well for the other panels, so there's no reason why it won't work here. As I mentioned before previously, I'm using dominoes to help with a little bit of strength and alignment to join these two panels. Given that these are shelves, I'm going to try and make sure that there is even weight, or at least a support near or on the join. I'm pretty confident that it'll handle it just fine. The desktop's working really well and that has infinitely more weight, but I'd rather play it safe here just in case. I also decided to cover the pocket holes. While I don't think they'll be seen, it takes no time at all to throw in a few plugs. In the last video I finally purchased my very first track saw, which is a cordless Bosch, and I've been super happy with it so far. At the time I only bought a single track, but I'm going to need a much longer one if I want to cut this in one pass, so I picked up a second track. Quite a few of you commented in the last video that I should put something sacrificial underneath the track when cutting the rubber strip, and that makes total sense. So this time I'm going to do that with a bit of the waste part of the panel. So with the tracks joined and a fresh edge cut into the guide, next I'll do the first cut to clean up the first edge. So with our fresh edge, I marked out the width of the first shelf. There's going to be 2 shelves, as I previously mentioned, and the first shelf will be slightly deeper than the top one. Once all marked out, I cut them with the track saw. Now I know I've banged on about this so many times, but having overhead dust collection is one of the best things I ever did for my shop. Not having to deal with the hose or worrying about whether or not I'm going to get tangled in it is really useful. And it certainly makes cleanup later on really easy as well. If you're interested in how I made this, then check out this video. And finally we can do everyone's favourite activity, which is of course is sanding. Now this timber I think is acacia, or a type of acacia, and it does seem to have some sort of oil or surface finish that I'm going to get rid of just to make sure that the paint's going to adhere well to it. I only bothered to sand to 120 grit here. I don't think any higher will make any difference, and we'll need to do a sand between coats of paint anyway, so I didn't go higher. Next I'm turning my attention to the part of the project that I've been dreading the most, and that's to start mounting the wall brackets that will hold our floating shelves. Before I can do that, I need to remove this small floating shelf that I made nearly 4 years ago. It's the very first house project I attempted when starting woodworking, and I'm dreading the carnage that I think is lying behind this. I know that it's a terrible shelf. It was not level, it couldn't hold a lot, and I recall having real trouble finding a wall stud. I'm just really hoping that the drywall behind it isn't full of holes or has cracked due to my inexperience at the time. I don't think my design here was too bad. I've seen lots of other people making floating shelves in this manner, but I just think my execution was probably lacking. But that's woodworking for you. It's all about growing and learning from your mistakes. In the end, it wasn't that bad. I think I had just built it up in my head that it was. Well, it's not as bad as I thought it would be. I thought I'd have a bunch of holes, but I think we can work with this. I'm not going to patch this out. The new shelf will cover these old mounting holes, so I didn't feel there was much point doing that. The brackets I'll be using for this build are heavy duty ones that I found on Amazon. Given the weight of these shelves, I'm going to use no less than 6 of these on the wall for each shelf, with at least one side always going into studs. Locating wall studs has always been an issue for me, even with stud finders. The stud finder I'm using here is something I actually found online about 6 or 7 years ago now, and uses a device that plugs into your phone along with a special app to locate the studs. It works pretty well, but I have trust issues, so another trick you can try is to use magnets to find the drywall screws. This should indicate that the stud is right beneath that location. You should of course always be careful to check and triple check for any electrical circuits or wiring behind the wall. You certainly don't want to be drilling into that. I used masking tape as a marker to indicate where the studs were so that I didn't have to draw on my wall too much. And then I worked my way down, marking up each stud location. The way these mounting holes for these brackets work, there can only be one side that's going to be able to go into the studs. The other side will need to use drywall anchors. After mounting the first bracket, I used a spirit level to then mark out, drill, and fix each bracket to the wall, eventually till I had all 6 installed. With the first set of brackets up, I can test fit the first shelf. We of course take a moment to pray to the shelf gods that it all holds.
In nomine Patris et Filii et Spiritus Sancti.
And breathe a sigh of relief when everything looks fine. Now the shelves don't really look like they're floating, we can see the brackets quite clearly underneath. So next I'm going to recess those into the underside of each shelf. To do that I'll first mark around the brackets underneath the shelf. Then on the top of the shelf, make some marks to indicate the left and the right of the bracket. I then took the shelf back into the workshop and on my laser made a routing template. I then set the depth of my pattern bit to just a hair more than the width of the bracket and proceeded to route out the slot. After routing out all the rebates on the shelf, the final part was to cut out the recess for the back of the bracket, which I did using my jigsaw. Off camera I repeated this same process for both shelves, and once that was done, it was off to painting, and again I did this in my garage using the exact same paint and technique as the desktop. If you're interested in knowing more about that, then I suggest watching the previous video where I covered that in more detail. So after a few days to let the paint dry, the only thing left to do is to install the shelves. They thankfully slotted into their brackets really nicely, and because they match the paint job, they essentially disappear and you really hardly notice that they're there. And lastly, a couple of screws to attach the brackets to the shelf itself, and we're done. So there we have it, the final result. I'm really happy with the way this one has come out in the end. It's not perfect, but I'm certainly glad I got over my fear of floating shelves and had another crack at it. The total cost of materials for this build was only around $150 odd, especially after I repurposed the old benchtop. If we include the cost of the new tools that I bought, however, well, I guess that's a discussion and an argument for another day. A quick shout out and thank you to all of my current channel members, and to welcome my newest one to the ranks, Chris, who's been around the Aussie maker community for years and is definitely a legend in his own right. Chris is a wonderful maker and has his own YouTube channel built by Chris, so be sure to go check him out. Thanks everyone for watching, and I'll see you on the next one.